Okay, I want you to think way back to your very first foreign language class. For most of us, the goal wasn't really about, chatting with locals on some future vacation. No, it was something else, a lot more structured, something that, I'm willing to bet, looked a whole lot like this.
Yeah, take a look. Desks all in neat rows, teacher up at the front, and a super thick textbook open to some really dense passage. Does this whole scene just bring it all back? That quiet scratching of pens, the intense focus on getting every single word just right? This right here, this is our starting point for understanding one of the oldest and honestly most influential methods of language teaching ever. All right, so let's do this. Let's take a little trip back in time. We're going to step right inside a typical classroom that uses what's known as the Grammar Translation Method, or GTM for short. And we're going to see exactly how a lesson plays out, piece by piece.
So the whole structure of a lesson was just incredibly methodical. It almost always kicked off with some kind of challenging text. We're talking classical literature here. And from there, it was a pretty predictable cycle. First, you'd translate it word for painful word. Then you'd have to memorize these long lists of vocabulary. After that, answer some questions to prove you understood it. And finally, drill those grammar rules into your head with fill-in-the-blank exercises. The focus wasn't on being creative, not at all. It was all about precise, repeatable steps. Sound familiar?
But here's the really weird part. Even though you're sitting in, let's say, a French class, pretty much all the talking, the teacher's explanations, the questions, the corrections, it's all happening in your native language. The language you're supposed to be learning is treated more like a science experiment, something to be picked apart and analyzed, not actually used to, communicate.
And believe me, this is not a new thing. Just check out this diary entry from a student written over 100 years ago. It just perfectly captures the whole GTM experience. Helena wasn't worried about speaking Latin. Nope. She was stressed out about forgetting the grammar rules for a test on Caesar. Her frustration is a direct result of this method's laser focus on getting the grammar right above literally everything else.
Okay, so we've seen what the classroom looks like. Now it's time to pull back the curtain and really understand the why. What exactly is this grammar translation method? And what are its core principles? Let's break it down.
The entire philosophy is right there in the name, grammar and translation. Those were the two pillars, the main events in the classroom. It's also sometimes called the classical method, and that's a big clue, because it was originally designed to teach classical languages like Latin and Greek.
The roles in this kind of classroom are, they're crystal clear and very traditional. The teacher is the absolute authority, the source of all knowledge. Communication is pretty much a one-way street, flowing from the teacher down to the students. And what's the student's job? To be a passive receiver, basically a sponge, just soaking up all the rules and vocabulary. There's almost no room for students to talk to each other or get creative with the language. This list really gets to the DNA of the whole method. A few things just jump right out. First, grammar is king. Everything, and I mean everything, revolves around these super elaborate rules. Second, texts aren't really for enjoyment. They're treated like puzzles to be analyzed. And maybe the biggest shocker? Look at the bottom there. Pronunciation is almost completely ignored. It's a system with a very, very specific and narrow purpose.
And wow, this chart just says it all, doesn't it? The overwhelming focus is on reading and writing. The skills you need to analyze books and translate stuff. But just look at speaking and listening. A flat 0. A big goose egg. The ability to actually have a conversation in the language you're learning, it's simply not a goal of this method. At all.
Now, I know this all might seem pretty strange to us today, but believe it or not, there was a clear logic behind it. To really get why it was taught this way, we have to look at where it came from. So the roots of this thing go way, way back to medieval Europe. Back then, Latin and Greek were the languages of scholarship. The goal wasn't to, order a coffee in Athens. It was to read the works of philosophers and scientists. Fast forward to the 19th century, and this becomes the gold standard for teaching languages in schools all over Europe, and even in places like the Ottoman Empire, which really needed diplomats who could translate official documents with perfect accuracy.
And this right here, this is the key to the whole thing. Success wasn't measured by how fluently you could speak. The real goal was mental training. It was thought that deciphering the super complex grammar of a language like Latin was the ultimate workout for your brain, like mental gymnastics.
This was all based on a theory that's pretty outdated now, called faculty psychology. The idea was that the mind was like a muscle, with different sections for memory, reason, and all that. So the intense memorization and logical puzzles required by GTM were seen as the perfect workout to beef up these mental faculties, making you a more disciplined and smarter person overall.
Now, it might be easy to just write all this off as some historical curiosity. But here's the thing. The ghost of the grammar translation method is still very much with us today. Let's take a look at how its legacy continues to shape how languages are taught.
You hear people call this a dead method, partly because, it was used to teach dead languages. But is it really gone? The answer is a definite no. Not even close. While very few teachers would use the pure old-school version today, its principles, they are very much alive and kicking.
The reason this method hangs around is because of its really clear trade-offs. On the one hand, it's fantastic for developing a deep understanding of grammar and for reading really difficult texts, and it's also super easy to create standardized tests for. But on the other hand, the weaknesses are huge. Students could literally spend years in a GTM classroom and come out unable to hold even a simple conversation.
So where do we see its DNA today? Well, look no further than those big, scary, standardized language exams a lot of us have to take. Those sections on grammar rules, reading comprehension, and sentence translation? That is a direct descendant of GTM. It survives because it's predictable, it's measurable, and honestly, it's easy for big institutions to use.
And that brings us to the final question, something for you to think about. Go back to your own language classes. What was the real goal? Was it to get you ready for a real conversation? To actually connect with other people and other cultures? Or was it about mastering the rules, analyzing text, and ultimately just passing the exam? The answer tells you a whole lot about the lingering legacy of the language class you probably remember.